Okay, I've got something really fun today. It's a plant that maybe not that many people are used to seeing. And for the people in the know, let's have a look at my shot of sunshine. Hi, my name is Memo, this is my channel, Houseplantygoodness, and essentially it's a place where I like to geek out about my big passion. You might be able to see some of it behind me, it's tropical houseplants. So yes, today I've got a very, very cool plant and I'll bring it up so you can see. And for the people that don't know, you might be able to understand now why I call it my shot of sunshine. So this is the Chlorophytum orchidastrum, I think, if I remember correctly, Fireflash. And for the people that might not know, and you wouldn't necessarily just by looking at it if you've never seen this plant, this is related to the very humble spider plant. But without further ado, let's dive into it. So a bit of background on this plant, how it came into my care, and just so you've got a bit of an understanding as to what this plant is really. So at least in my experience, this isn't one that comes up very often. I'll talk about that in availability, but I had seen this 6 or 7 years ago in my local garden centre. I think it was a local garden centre. At the very beginning of this part of my planty journey, which has probably been about 6, 7 years ago, I'd say at this point, I had two main providers of plants. I could use another word, I'm not going to. One being my local garden centre, which is still my local garden centre, and two was a plant store that was in the marketplace. So I live in Norwich in the UK, and there's a big kind of covered marketplace, and there was an amazing dude that used to work there. He used to have a stall, and he had a whole bunch of houseplants. And this is when it was starting to boom. I'm talking even pre-pandemic days. And I remember really vividly when I was first kind of getting back into houseplants, I would literally take every single one of my lunch breaks. Apparently English is hard on a Saturday because I'm filming on a Saturday. To go down to this covered marketplace to go to his stand and have a look at the beautiful plants. And I think, as I said, I don't know if I bought this from the garden centre or from him, both of which had it at some point. So I looked at this plant and I just went, I don't know what that is, but just for the orange kind of stems slash petioles, I would assume they're probably petioles, they're not actually stems, I was gone. I love anything that's kind of neon colored. This one specifically is a bit bleached out, and that's because I'm giving it a bit too much light, but I'll get into that in accessories and care. And yeah, I picked one of these up. Keeping in mind, I had very little kind of like current experience on houseplants. I didn't know anything about this plant. There was absolutely zero information about this plant online at that point, other than like the sellers' websites or even the growers' website. But I liked it, so I picked it up. I learned a few hard lessons, and I'll talk you through them, and throughout the rest of the video, I'll tell you what I've done differently with this plant. So one of the big things, and I'll see if I can bring it up so I can show you, I'll show you a good example. So hopefully that will focus and it won't focus on me. I don't know if you can see that little leaf tip. If you can't see the little leaf tip, I will see if I can insert a picture. But the biggest issue with this plant, I find, overall, bit of a spoiler, not particularly difficult plant to care for, but one of the things that it desperately needs is really good water and really good quality water. And by that, I mean by and large, and that is only if you are annoyed by the very tips of the leaves getting a bit crispy. And this crispiness has happened even now when I'm doing a lot of things right. And I'll explain what I mean by that. So you will get brown crispy tips at the top of the very tip of the leaves. Doesn't get as bad as it can do with certain calatheas, so don't switch off just yet. But it is one of those things that tends to be highly sensitive to kind of any salts and minerals that might exist in the water. So if, and only if, you want to have a pristine plant that doesn't have the crispy tips, and even this, and I'll talk to that in a minute, I would suggest either reverse osmosis water, rainwater, or distilled water. I'm not a huge fan of distilled water or reverse osmosis water because there's reasons basically. But that is something that you're going to need to keep in mind. If, however, you don't have any issue with that whatsoever, normal tap water is fine. It won't kill the plant. It is just a cosmetic thing because the tips of their leaves are very, very thin. And as I've talked about on other videos, if you've got very thin leaf tips, it means that there's very small layers of cells that are happening there. So they're highly sensitive that if minerals go and deposit there, they start kind of browning off and kind of becoming a bit crispy. That's all it is. But other than that, this plant was okay. The other thing that I learned the hard way at that point is because I did figure out very early on with this that it was related to the humble spider plant. And anybody who's grown a humble spider plant will know that they're not particularly difficult. I say this knowing full well that I am also talking rubbish for a few people. And I see you, and I appreciate you because I am the same. I can struggle with like spider plants. A lot of the times everybody's like, spider plants are so easy. Anybody that you would hear, they'd be like, it's as easy as a pothos. And I know that there's a lot of people that struggle with them. I can't remember who it was. Somebody, one of the big like houseplanty influencers on Instagram in the UK, and I cannot remember. If I can find the name, I'll put it at the top. If not, I apologize. But they were mentioning that some people that find them difficult to grow and all of these things is because they need to make seasonal adjustments and that will make a big difference. And when I heard that, and I'm just like, oh, that's probably what it was actually with them. But overall, this was as easy, I would actually say, and I've struggled a few times with spider plants, this was easier. I'll say that for a fact. And the thing that I made that was a mistake with this is I put it in too little light originally, and it struggled a bit too much. So that first plant still survived about a year or two in my care, and it's not that it died, it's the fact that I got sick and tired of looking at it looking very busted, basically. So this review for this plant is my 1 year experience with this plant, but I also have another 2 years of experience with the previous plant. So let's talk speed of growth. And with my plant, and I'm trying to count here, 1, 2, 3, 4, I think it's 4. Yeah, 4 growth points in this one pot. The interesting thing, and I'll see if I can bring it in so you might be able to see it if it will focus, I don't actually know if it's 4 individual smaller growth points, but because they're all so close together, it might be, I've never fully unrooted this, if that makes sense, or fully kind of taken off the soil for it. So I'm not entirely sure if there's one central stem in the middle and it branches out like this, or if it's 4 individual plantlets that they've just grouped a lot together just to create a bit more of a bushy appearance. But speed of growth with this one. So, and I can talk from it as if it's each individual plantlet. So, if a golden pothos, not in here because this plant does not live in my conservatory. These plants have never been grown in ideal conditions. These have always been grown in regular household conditions. So that's one thing that's a plus for this. But say in my house, a regular golden pothos on the growing stem might get 2 leaves during the growing season each month on one kind of growing stem. This will probably get about the same. If it's not 2 leaves, it's 1 leaf, and it does slow down considerably in the winter, I will say that. So you might get 1 leaf every 2 months or every 3 months. But this plant maintains its beauty. It just kind of pauses for a bit over winter, or it doesn't go quite as fast so that it can kind of catch up. The other thing that did happen with this over the winter, and I do have it a bit now, I don't know whether or not, again, it will focus right in the center there. If not, I'll see if I've got some pictures and add them here. Every single one of those plantlets had blooms on it. So, and I let them go for a bit of time. It probably delayed the growth of this plant, probably more than it should have done. But I was really curious. I'd never got my previous one to bloom. So I'm just like, you know what? Let's see what it looks like. It was interesting. Am I going to do it again? Probably not. Because the blooms kind of almost look, I'm trying to describe what they look like. They almost look like little shell things. And I know people are going to say they were seed pods. They did eventually turn into seed pods. But they were very unusual blooms. They didn't smell, I don't think, bad or good, if I remember correctly, and they didn't get very tall. They were very much in the crown of the plant. But overall, a relatively steady towards fast grower. Now, propagation with this one, and again, I'll hold my hands up and say I've not propagated this. If you have propagated this, let us know. But I would imagine this can propagate very similar to a spider plant, but the difference is, as far in my experience, for however long I've grown both this plant and the previous plant, this doesn't throw out little babies. So that's, I should have mentioned that earlier on. It doesn't have the traditional kind of spider plant bloom and then little babies. Had I have left those blooms, they might have done babies, but I don't think this is how this plant works. I might be wrong. If you know that I'm wrong, do let me know down below. Have no problem. I would imagine with this one, it's not going to be one of those things that you take a leaf off, because again, I'll show you what the inside looks like, and you can kind of see, if I can kind of get the light to also focus on that as well. I would imagine with this, if it's plantlets, you do divisions, and if you get more little plantlets coming out from this, it would be divisions that you would do in order to propagate this plant. Because I haven't propagated it, I don't know how easy or difficult it is to propagate. But in terms of its care, relatively easy care. So I would imagine propagation probably wouldn't be that difficult with this plant. So let's touch on availability with this one, because I did kind of like hint at this earlier on. Is this a rare plant to the market? Generally no, and I can only talk about the UK and Europe that I'm based in. So, and I know somebody, actually I should have mentioned this earlier on, and I'll touch on kind of my conditions in the accessories and care. Somebody mentioned in a previous video that it'd be really good if some of the content creators out there kind of gave explanations of where they're growing. I might not do that on every single video because it will probably get boring for the people that have been here for a long time. But I'll see if I can start, I can't make any promises, it needs to be that I remember, but I'll see if I can start putting in the description. So if you are one of those individuals that's based in different parts of the world and you might be struggling versus me that might not be struggling, or vice versa, you should be able to see a bit more information about my growing conditions of certain plants down in the description below. Sorry, slightly off topic there, but yes, in terms of availability, it's not a rare plant, but it is a plant that I've usually only seen in flushes come out. So I got this around this time last year. As I said, it's about a year old. And that's roughly when you start seeing them coming back into the market. So kind of springtime and kind of early summer is when you start seeing these. And I would imagine it's just because it's when they're released from the nurseries in the Netherlands. And that's it really, like grab them if you like them when you see them, because you might then have to wait for a whole year unless some people or some shops have got them in stock and they haven't been able to sell them. They tend to go relatively quickly because, again, how often are you going to get a plant that's this interesting looking? And the interesting thing with this, again, in that respect, it's more, I would class this as more of a common house plant rather than a rare house plant. I hate that expression. But because of that, it means that there's a lot of people that are buying this, not necessarily just houseplanty enthusiasts or houseplant collectors. So there's a lot of people that would look at this and just go, oh, that's unusual. And to be fair, having grown this, I would imagine most of them will be able to keep it relatively happy and relatively looking like it's an okay, like happy, cheery plant. So yes, in terms of price, I can't remember the price exactly that I paid for this. I'll put it up here. And I think I got this from Grow Tropicals. And I remember their price was good, but I remember back when I first bought it, when maybe there wasn't that many people that were interested in this plant, or maybe it was just flushing the market. And I do think it was on that market stall, which one of the things is I have never seen cheaper plant prices than I ever did in that market stall. And it was a lovely individual, if I'm not mistaken, called Rob. So I don't think Rob still watches my videos, but if he does, hi, and I miss you dearly. But this is a plant that I would say is a relatively on the affordable side of things. I'd be really curious if you live in different parts of the world than the UK, or even if you live in Europe, what kind of prices are you seeing these plants come up in your location? I'd be really curious to see that down below in the comments. So looking at pests with this one, and this is interesting. Two types of pests are the predominant ones that I have seen at least in my houseplants, at least in my kind of version of this plant, both this one now and the one that I used to own before, I've not had, touch wood, spider mites, not spider mites. I have had spider mites. I've not had mealybugs on this, but yes, I have had spider mites on this, and I'm trying to see if I can maybe give you, is there any example of a leaf that used to have spider mites? I don't think there is. Maybe? Maybe. No, I don't think there is. I think that those ones got rejected quite quickly, maybe, and this is probably the crustiest looking leaf on the whole plant. Maybe that leaf there, and you can see a bit of extra browning on that one, but that was it. And then the other thing is, not all of the time, but the leaves are just thick enough that I have seen the occasional thrip on this. Has this ever had any real issue with thrips? And other than just one treatment, did they all disappear? Yeah. Like, the thrips were not a big pest pain point for this specific plant. Again, if your experiences vary than mine, do let us all know down below. But yeah, overall, not a particularly bad plant in terms of pests. This is also not one that I've ever got fungus gnats in it. If you are getting fungus gnats on this plant, the issue isn't the fungus gnat. The issue is you are probably watering this way too frequently. So bear that in mind. But yeah, overall, unless you're particularly icked out by spider mites, and it doesn't get them all the time, I'll say that as well. I've had to deal with spider mites once on this, and again, treated them once, and they kind of went away. It is as robust a lot of the times, I find, as the kind of traditional spider plants. Now let's talk accessories and care with this one. So you might see that I've got it in a clear pot. Does it need it? Not necessarily, but I do want to see the situation of the roots. And just to give you an idea, this was repotted into a pot that was 2 sizes larger than it was before a week ago. I could not see any roots a week ago. Aggressively rooting plant, aggressively rooting plant. And the reason why I had to repot this, I would have liked to have done it slightly later, is because I went from winter when it wasn't getting watered that frequently, maybe like once every 7 days, 10 days, on average is when I found that my plant needed it, to coming into the spring, and this was needing to get watered every 2 to 3 days. And I'm just like, oh no, you are drying out way too quickly. So I gave it a bigger pot. It has not skipped a beat. Does it need as big of a pot, as deep of a pot? Not necessarily, but I'd already given it a bit of a smaller tower pot before, so I had to keep it in a tower pot to keep going. I haven't got any roots coming out of the bottom yet, but guarantee you this by the end of the summer is going to be fully rooted into this. Now, the other thing in terms of the care that I'm giving this one, remember how I mentioned light and my light levels were too low for the previous plant. This one is in my south-facing window for my house. Before you say anything, my south-facing window in the house, I don't have net curtains, but one of the things that I found, because I really can't put many net curtains on that specific window, is, you know, the film that you can get sometimes for your windows where you can make it like a one-way mirror thing? I don't know how else to describe it. I've got that, and it actually blocks enough of the light there that it's on the very higher end of bright indirect. It's still a bit too bright, and you might see some of these leaves, there is a tiny bit of bleaching that is happening because of the light. Don't know if that's going to get picked up. There's slightly lighter kind of coloration there. But other than that, that's fine. And to be fair, that happened more with the original leaves, which meant that obviously I was probably giving it a lot more light than the growers were versus what it came to in my conditions. But interestingly enough, having grown it in my conditions, all of the newer leaves are a bit more hardened off to that slightly higher light level. And that is something that not a lot of people talk about. And you need to remember this sometimes, because you need to think about plants the way that growers might be. If somebody's growing in a big greenhouse, they might be giving it a lot less light than you think, and that is because they want to ensure as much success as possible, because the average person isn't going to have greenhouse light conditions in their home. They're going to have much lower light levels. So sometimes when you get something that is meant to be a kind of bright indirect light plant and you put it in your space and all of a sudden you're just like, why is this getting bleached out? It's because it's been trained to accept slightly lower light. It doesn't mean that it's necessarily going to cause any real issues to the plant long term, as long as you're not going for, say, a medium light plant to a bright light location. It just means it's going to need a moment to adjust. Some of the older leaves might look a bit bleached out, but a lot of the times, depending on how adaptable the plant is, it'll kind of like stabilize, and the newer leaves will be more adept at dealing with the slightly higher light levels because it realizes, okay, I'm here now, this is my new reality, I need to adjust to this light level. Again, as long as you're not frying the plant. But yes, there is that to be said. Now, on the crispy tips, because I hinted at this earlier on, I have been watering this with reverse osmosis water that I use predominantly. I don't even know what I use it for these days, other than this and maybe a couple of orchids that I know are a bit too sensitive. But that is pretty much all I use my reverse osmosis water. And the crispiness that you are seeing is because once a month, I give this a very, 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 very light bit of liquid fertilizer in here as well. So that tells you that even with some of the best quality water, that infrequent use of fertilizer will still give you some of the crispy tips. So in my humblest of opinions, I would say even if your conditions are perfect, something to bear in mind for this plant is you might never get away from the crispy tips, and that is absolutely fine. The thing that I did mention earlier on is the level of crispiness. So I've got a very small section of the very tip of some of these leaves going crispy. That's fine. When I was doing regular tap water, and remember I've mentioned this on a previous video when I was talking more about kind of like really looking deeper at your water, and I'll link it at the top there. I live in a very hard water type area in the UK, so I just had a tiny bit more crisping. That was all it was. And again, this is predominantly an aesthetic thing. But in my humblest of opinion, for a plant that looks like this, probably worth it. But other than that, I don't do anything massively difficult with this plant. It doesn't give me any grief. It sits in my living room. It sits above a radiator as well. Like, this is just a plant that as long as you give it the right light level and as long as you do let it, I find that I need to let this go dry. As soon as it goes dry, I will water. I don't want to leave it dry for too many days on end, but it's at its happiest as well. This has got very thick, chunky roots. I tend to find that this is a bit thirstier than the average spider plant, the kind of more traditional spider plant that we're used to seeing. But other than that, it's kind of a plug it and forget it plant, which for something that gives this much of a payoff, great. The only thing, and I will mention a negative, it can get a bit wide. So that is something to remember. Think of it more like a bird's nest type plant rather than a plant that's going to get very, very tall. But I know a lot of people that don't want to grow things on janky support sticks or moss poles. This might be one for you. It's a bit on the wide side. So let's come into some final thoughts and scoring. So I'll start this off the way that I normally do. So knowing what I know now, this is the second time, as I said, that I'm growing this plant. If I didn't have this plant, would I repurchase this plant? I think the fact that I've bought this a second time around, even after my first experience, should probably answer that question. Yes, time and time again, I will always try at some point within my kind of houseplanty journey to have a version of this plant around. I didn't have it for quite a few years because I got distracted with everything else. But now that I'm rediscovering some more of these common houseplants and I've got this back into my care, I cannot tell you how happy I am to have it back. It's great. I'm enjoying it. Do I think that this has the potential to become those kind of heirloom large plant that you can have for years on end? Yes, as long as you can treat it nicely and as long as it's kind of happy with both the light levels, you're not overwatering it and all of these things, and you don't mind those very crispy tips, I'd say yes. I'd say a hard yes on that one. Now, scoring. So if 0 or 1 is the worst and 10 being the best, what would I score this at? This is a solid 8 or a 9 for me. I'm going to be honest. A solid 8 or a 9 for me. And the only thought I have had since re-owning this plant, even from that first experience that was a bit wobbly, is why did I wait for so long to get this plant back into my care? I enjoy it so much. For the people that don't know about the shot of sunshine that I mentioned earlier on in the video, many, many years ago, I used to work in a kind of bar restaurant, and we'd have long, long days on our feet. And the barman, obviously, he couldn't give us alcohol because we were working. So he would give us a shot of orange juice. So whenever he'd see us getting really, really stressful, he'd say, right, stop, come here. Let's have a shot of sunshine, which is why this is forever going to be my shot of sunshine, because of those kind of orange petioles. And I know I heard a lot of people that said it probably wasn't the orange juice, it was just that moment of stopping and kind of doing something else. Those kind of things. Doesn't matter what it was, it will always and forever be the shot of sunshine. Same with this. And this is the reason why I have it in the living room, quite close to where the TV and the couch that I lay on most evenings, because I am lazy, where I can see this on a frequent basis, because it just lifts my spirits. I'm just like, this is such a happy, happy plant for me. So having said all that, yes, I do stick to 8 or a 9 for this. I'd say strongly for me. It's not that difficult of a plant. It doesn't need a lot of babying. Yes, you'll get the occasional crispy tips. I don't mind. And there is, as I said, the potential for this to become a very large and established plant that you could have for years, based on what I'm seeing this time around when I'm just tweaked a few things. But yes, I'm curious to hear your opinions on this. I know some of you have got this plant. I know some of you used to have this plant. Maybe some people were interested in getting this plant. Did any of what I say surprise you? Does this align with what you were thinking? Let me know in the comments down below, and let's have that conversation. And also, as a little quick update, second week of jury service now, so I'm almost at the finish line. I'm starting this week for that one. So yes, hopefully I'll be done with that soon so I can actually have some downtime, because I have no downtime at the moment. But yes, sorry, that was a little jury service update. But yes, hopefully you've enjoyed. Hopefully I shall see you here soon. And I truly, truly hope that you have a great rest of your day. Thanks. Bye.